The video had over 3 million views when I woke up. In it, I was screaming at a waitress, throwing a glass, humiliating myself in front of strangers. But here's the problem. I had never been to that restaurant, and the person who sent it to everyone I knew was my own daughter-in-law. Margaret Hale had always believed that a good life was built quietly, not through grand gestures or loud declarations, but through consistency, showing up, doing what needed to be done, and loving people in the small, steady ways that rarely get noticed. At 68, her days followed a rhythm she had grown comfortable with. Morning coffee by the kitchen window, a short walk through her garden, where the roses her late husband planted still bloomed stubbornly every spring. Afternoons spent managing small details of the estate her husband had left behind. Nothing extravagant, just enough to keep things in order. From the outside, her life looked peaceful, and for the most part it was. Her son Daniel lived just 20 minutes away. He visited occasionally, though less often than he used to. Life had become busier for him in recent years. Work, responsibilities, marriage. Especially marriage. Sophie had entered their lives 5 years earlier. Margaret still remembered the first time they met. It was at a small restaurant downtown. Daniel had insisted on introducing them properly. Sophie had arrived in a cream-colored dress, her smile polished, her posture perfect. She was the kind of woman who seemed to understand exactly how she was being perceived at every moment. "Margaret," she had said warmly, extending her hand. "I've heard so much about you." "Not Mom." Margaret noticed that immediately, but she smiled anyway. Because that's what you do when your son looks at someone like she's the center of his world. At first everything had seemed fine. Sophie was polite, attentive even. She brought flowers on holidays, asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments. If there was any distance between them, it was subtle, something you could almost convince yourself wasn't really there. But over time, Margaret began to notice small things. The way Sophie would gently redirect conversations when they drifted toward family history. The way she asked questions about finances, not directly but carefully, like someone testing the edges of a boundary. The way Daniel, once open and easy with his mother, had grown slightly more reserved in her presence. Nothing obvious. Nothing you could point to and say this is wrong. Just shifts. Margaret told herself it was normal. Families changed. Dynamics evolved. A son builds his own life, and the mother learns to step back. That was the natural order of things. Still, there were moments. Little pauses in conversation where Sophie's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Quick glances exchanged between Sophie and Daniel that stopped the moment Margaret noticed them. A certain tension that lingered just beneath the surface, like a crack in glass you could only see when the light hit it at the right angle. Margaret never confronted it. She had lived long enough to understand that not every discomfort needed to become a conflict. So she adjusted. She spoke less about the past. She stopped offering advice unless asked. She made herself smaller, in ways she never would have admitted out loud. Because what mattered most to her was simple. That her son was happy. That her family stayed intact. And if that meant ignoring a few uneasy feelings, then so be it. After all, nothing had actually happened. Not yet. At least that's what she believed. Until the morning everything changed. The morning began like any other. Margaret stood in her kitchen, waiting for the coffee to finish brewing, her hand resting lightly against the cool marble counter. Sunlight slipped through the window above the sink, casting soft shadows across the floor. Outside, the garden was still damp from last night's rain, the roses glistening faintly in the early light. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of morning she had come to rely on. Then her phone buzzed. First she ignored it. Messages could wait. Most of them were routine anyway, reminders, group chats, the occasional forwarded article from a friend. But then it buzzed again. And again. A strange, insistent rhythm. Margaret frowned slightly and reached for it. 3 missed calls. 7 messages. All within the last 2 minutes. Her chest tightened just a little, not fear, not yet, but something close to it. She opened the first message. It was from an old friend. * Margaret. I don't know what to say. Is this really you? *. Below the text was a link. Her fingers hesitated for a moment before tapping it. The video loaded almost instantly. And then, she froze. The woman on the screen looked exactly like her. Same silver hair. Same posture. Same voice. But the expression, it was wrong. The video showed her standing inside a crowded restaurant, her face twisted in anger, her voice sharp and raised. "I asked for this 20 minutes ago," the woman snapped, slamming a glass onto the table. "Is this how you treat your customers?" People turned to stare. A young waitress stood frozen in front of her, visibly shaken. The scene escalated quickly. The woman, Margaret continued yelling, her tone growing harsher, more humiliating. At one point she even knocked over a glass, the liquid spilling across the table as gasps echoed around the room. Someone in the background muttered, "What's wrong with her?" The video ended abruptly. Margaret didn't move. For a long moment she simply stared at the screen, her reflection faintly visible in the black border around the video. Her first thought was simple. That's not me. Not just denial. Certainty. She had never been to that restaurant. She didn't recognize the interior, the staff, or even the people sitting nearby. And yet, every detail of the woman's face was hers. Every movement. Every inflection of her voice. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her out of the stunned silence. Another message. Then another. She opened one at random. Margaret. I'm really disappointed. I never thought you were that kind of person. Another. You should apologize publicly before this gets worse. Her breathing grew shallow. The room, just moments ago calm and familiar, now felt strangely distant, like she was standing inside someone else's life, watching it unravel. Then her phone rang. Daniel. Her thumb hovered over the screen before she answered. Hello. There was no greeting. Mom, he said, his voice tight, controlled in a way she hadn't heard before. What is going on? Margaret swallowed. Daniel, I just saw it. That video, it's not. Everyone's sending it to me, he cut in. My colleagues, my clients, everyone. A pause. Heavy. Embarrassed. Did this really happen? He asked. The question hit harder than she expected. Not anger. Not concern. Doubt. No, she said firmly. Of course not. Daniel, I've never even been there. That video is fake. Silence. On the other end of the line, she could hear him breathing, like he was weighing something carefully. I don't know, Mom, he said finally. It looks pretty real. Something inside her chest shifted. A quiet, almost imperceptible crack. Before she could respond, another message appeared on her screen. This one wasn't from a friend. It was from Sophie. I'm so sorry this is happening, Margaret. Let me know if you need anything. Margaret stared at the words. Then slowly her gaze drifted back to the video. And for the first time, beneath the shock and confusion, a new feeling began to form. Not fear. Not yet. But something colder. Something that whispered very quietly. This wasn't an accident. Margaret didn't reply to Sophie's message. She set the phone down slowly on the kitchen counter, as if any sudden movement might make everything worse. As if this fragile, impossible situation could still be handled gently if she was careful enough. But her phone kept vibrating. Relentless. When she picked it up again, the notifications had multiplied. More messages. More missed calls. Even emails. And then she saw it. A social media notification. Someone had tagged her. Her stomach tightened as she opened it. The video, had been posted publicly. Not just shared privately between friends or whispered about in messages. Public. Visible to anyone. The caption read, this is how some people treat service workers. Disgusting. Below it, the views were climbing rapidly. Hundreds. Then thousands. The comments were worse. Entitled old woman. People like this shouldn't be allowed in public. Someone needs to teach her a lesson. Margaret felt her throat go dry. These weren't strangers discussing a hypothetical person. They were talking about her. Or at least the version of her they believed was real. Her hands trembled slightly as she scrolled. Then she saw a familiar name. Sophie Hale liked this post. Margaret froze. She stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Liked. Not shared. Not commented. Just acknowledged. Publicly. A small, almost meaningless action if you didn't know better. But Margaret did know better. Or at least she was beginning to. Her phone rang again. This time she almost didn't answer. But she recognized the number. Her neighbor Linda. Margaret forced her voice to stay steady. "Hello. Margaret," Linda said immediately, her tone careful, almost hesitant. "I just saw something online and I wanted to check on you." Margaret closed her eyes briefly. "I'm fine," she said. The lie came automatically. "Well, people are talking," Linda continued gently. "I don't know what's going on, but it's not real," Margaret said more firmly this time. "That video isn't real." There was a pause. "I believe you," Linda replied. But there was something in her voice. Not doubt exactly, but uncertainty. And somehow that felt just as heavy. After the call ended, Margaret stood alone in her kitchen, the silence pressing in around her again. Except now it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. She picked up her phone once more and opened the video. This time she watched it more carefully. Not as a victim, but as an observer. Every movement, every word, every detail. It was her face, her voice, her mannerisms. But something was off. Subtle, almost invisible. The timing of the expressions didn't quite match the emotion. The way the light hit her face shifted slightly between frames. And the voice, while eerily accurate, carried a faint artificial smoothness, like it had been polished too perfectly. Margaret leaned closer to the screen. Her mind began to sharpen, to focus. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't a bad angle or an unfortunate coincidence. It was constructed, deliberate, carefully made. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Sophie. Daniel is really stressed. Maybe it's best if you stay low for a while. Let things calm down. Margaret read it twice. Then a third time. Stay low. Let things calm down. The words sounded supportive. Reasonable even. But something about them made her chest tighten. Because if the video wasn't real, then what exactly was she supposed to be laying low for? Margaret slowly set the phone down again. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark screen. For a moment she barely recognized the woman looking back. Then very quietly she spoke. "This didn't happen to me," she said. The words felt different this time. Stronger. More certain. Her eyes hardened slightly. "No," she corrected herself under her breath. "This was done to me." And somewhere, deep beneath the shock and humiliation, something else began to take shape. Not fear. Not confusion. But awareness. And with it, the first unmistakable hint of resolve. By the end of the day, Margaret's world no longer resembled the one she had woken up in. It unraveled quietly at first. A missed call from the church coordinator. A short, polite email from the women's group. We think it's best if you take some time before attending future gatherings. No accusations. No confrontation. Just distance. Carefully worded. Carefully placed. Like doors closing without ever being slammed. Margaret sat in her living room that afternoon, the curtains half drawn, her phone resting beside her on the arm of the chair. The television was on but muted. Images moved across the screen without meaning. Her attention kept drifting back to the silence. Not the peaceful kind she once cherished. This silence felt different. Heavy. Watchful. As if the world outside had quietly decided something about her and moved on without asking. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message. It was a notification from her bank. Margaret frowned and opened it. A routine alert. But something about it caught her attention. A scheduled meeting. With Daniel. And Sophie. Tomorrow morning. Subject line. Financial discussion and future arrangements. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. She hadn't scheduled any meeting. Slowly she scrolled down. There it was. A note added beneath the appointment. Given recent concerns, we believe it's time to review management of assets. Recent concerns. Margaret let out a slow breath. So that was it. It hadn't even been a full day. And already things were shifting. Not just socially. Not just emotionally. But structurally. Her reputation questioned. Her judgment implied. Her control quietly being challenged. She set the phone down and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. For a moment she allowed herself to feel it. The humiliation. The disbelief. The ache of being seen by the people who mattered most. Not as who she was, but as something distorted and false. But beneath that, something else stirred. Because this was happening too quickly. Too efficiently. As if steps had already been prepared. As if someone had been waiting for the right moment. Margaret sat up slowly. Her gaze moved toward the bookshelf across the room, where a small framed photo rested among the others. Her and her husband. Taken years ago. He had always been careful. Meticulous. Especially when it came to finances, legal matters, long-term planning. Always think 3 steps ahead, he used to say. Margaret had listened. More than anyone realized. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Sophie. We're worried about you, Margaret. After everything that's happened, we just want to help. Tomorrow's meeting is for your benefit. Margaret stared at the words. Worried. Help. Benefit. Each one perfectly chosen. Each one sounding kind. But now they felt different. She opened the message thread. Scrolled up. Read everything again. And this time she noticed it. The timing. Sophie's first message had come after the video started spreading. Not before. Not during. After. As if she had already known it would reach Margaret. As if she had been waiting. Margaret's expression didn't change. But something inside her settled. Not into fear. Not into anger. Into clarity. She reached for her phone and opened the video once more. Watched it again. Frame by frame. This time she wasn't looking at herself. She was looking for mistakes. And they were there. Small. Almost invisible. But real. The lighting inconsistency near the edge of her jaw. The unnatural smoothness in the voice transitions. The slight delay between expression and reaction. Margaret paused the video. Zoomed in. Studied it. Then she set the phone down carefully. Very carefully. Because now she understood something important. This wasn't just about humiliation. It wasn't just about reputation. This was about control. And someone, very close to her, was trying to take it. Margaret stood up slowly. The room felt different now. Sharper. More defined. The quiet no longer pressed against her. It listened. And for the first time since that morning, Margaret didn't feel like something was happening to her. She felt like she was beginning to see it. Whatever this was. Whoever had started it. They had made one mistake. They thought she would stay quiet. They thought she would retreat. They thought she would break. Margaret walked toward the window and looked out at the garden. The roses were still there. Unchanged. Steady. She folded her hands lightly in front of her. And spoke just above a whisper. Let's see how far you plan this. Because tomorrow, she would start planning too. Margaret did not sleep much that night. Not because she was afraid, but because her mind refused to stay still. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the video over and over. Not as a victim this time, but as someone studying a problem that needed to be solved. Every frame, every shadow, every pause between words. There was a pattern there. There had to be. By the time the first light of morning crept through the curtains, Margaret was already out of bed. Her movements were calm, deliberate. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy outfit. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be misinterpreted. Then she made her coffee, just as she always did. Routine mattered. It kept the mind steady. But today, beneath that routine, something had shifted. Margaret sat at the kitchen table with her phone in front of her. The video paused mid-frame. She leaned closer. This time she slowed it down. Frame by frame. At first, everything looked seamless. Too seamless. And that was the problem. Real life had imperfections. Tiny inconsistencies in lighting, movement, timing. This video felt polished. Manufactured. She tapped the screen, zooming in near the edge of her jawline. There. Flicker. Barely visible. The lighting shifted unnaturally between frames, as if 2 separate images had been blended together. Margaret's eyes narrowed. She rewound the video, played it again, then again. Now she saw more. The reflection on the glass didn't match the angle of her hand. The shadow beneath her chin appeared half a second too late. And the voice. Margaret pressed pause again. Her own voice stared back at her from the frozen image. She tapped play and listened carefully. The tone was right. The cadence was right. But the transitions between words, too smooth. As if the spaces between them had been erased. As if someone had constructed the sentence rather than spoken it. Margaret leaned back slowly in her chair. "It's fake," she said quietly. Not as a guess. Not as a hope. As a conclusion. Her phone buzzed. She didn't look at it immediately. Instead, she reached for a notepad from the drawer and began writing. Lighting inconsistencies. Shadow delay. Audio smoothing. Reflection mismatch. She underlined the last point. Then she circled it. Because reflections were hard to fake perfectly. And whoever had made this video, no matter how skilled, had missed that detail. Her phone buzzed again. This time she glanced at it. Another message from Sophie. Asterisk will see you at 10. Daniel thinks it's best to move quickly on everything. Asterisk. Move quickly. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Of course they did. Speed prevented questions. Speed prevented doubt. Speed forced decisions before truth could catch up. Margaret set the phone down without replying. Instead, she opened her contacts. Scrolled. Paused. Then selected a name. Ethan Cole. Her neighbor's grandson. 23. Quiet. Brilliant with computers. He had helped her once before. Fixing a minor issue with her laptop, explaining things patiently without making her feel out of place. At the time it had seemed insignificant. Now, it might not be. Margaret hesitated for only a second before pressing call. The line rang twice. Then, "Hello. Ethan," she said, her voice calm but firm. "This is Margaret Hale. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all. Is everything okay?" Margaret glanced at the paused image on her screen. The version of herself that wasn't real. "No," she said honestly. "But I think I know why." A brief pause. Then Ethan's tone shifted, more attentive now. "What do you need?" Margaret's fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table. Her gaze steady. "I need you to look at a video," she said. "And tell me exactly how it was made." Another pause. Longer this time. But not hesitant. Focused. "All right," Ethan replied. "Send it to me." Margaret ended the call and sat there for a moment, the quiet settling around her again. But it no longer felt suffocating. Felt controlled. Measured. She picked up her phone, attached the video and pressed send. Then she stood, straightened her shoulders, and looked at her reflection in the window. "They think I'll defend myself," she murmured softly. Her eyes sharpened. "But I won't." A small pause. Just long enough for the thought to settle. "I'll prove them wrong instead." And somewhere, beneath the calm surface she wore so well, the first real move of the game had just been made. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Margaret expected that. People like him didn't rush, they examined, analyzed, verified. Still, as the minutes stretched into nearly an hour, she felt the quiet tension return. Not panic. Not anymore. Just anticipation. At exactly 9:12 a.m., her phone buzzed. "Ethan. This isn't real." Margaret read the message once. Then again. A slow breath left her chest. Not relief. Confirmation. Her phone rang almost immediately after. She answered without hesitation. "Tell me," she said. Ethan didn't waste time. "It's a deepfake," he said. "A very good one, but not perfect." Margaret moved to the kitchen table and sat down, her posture straight, her focus absolute. "What did you find?" "A few things," Ethan replied. "First, the facial mapping is layered over someone else's body. That's why the movement looks slightly off. It's subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it." Margaret nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see her. "I noticed the timing," she said. "The expressions don't match the reactions exactly." "Exactly," Ethan confirmed. "There's also frame interpolation, basically. They smoothed out transitions to make it look more natural. But in doing that, they removed the imperfections that real footage has." Margaret's eyes drifted back to the paused video. Too perfect. Which made it imperfect. "And the voice?" she asked. A brief pause. "That's cloned audio," Ethan said. "They trained it on samples of your voice, Probably from videos, voicemails, anything they could find. Then they generated speech to match the script. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. So someone planned this, she said quietly. Yes, Ethan replied. This wasn't random. This took time, skill, and money. Money. The word lingered. Margaret leaned back slightly. Can you trace where it came from? She asked. Another pause, longer this time. I might be able to, Ethan said carefully. There are artifacts in the file, compression signatures, rendering patterns. Sometimes creators leave traces without realizing it. Margaret's gaze sharpened. Sometimes, she repeated. Ethan exhaled softly. This one has something interesting. Margaret didn't speak. She waited. There's a watermark, he continued. Not visible to the eye, but embedded in the file structure. It points to a specific rendering software, and more importantly, a specific service provider. Margaret's pulse slowed. Not racing. Focusing. Can you identify them? She asked. Yes, Ethan said. It's a freelance platform. High-end work. Custom jobs. A beat. And whoever commissioned this paid for it. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Not in exhaustion. In clarity. Because now the shape of it was becoming visible. Not just an attack. A transaction. Someone had wanted this badly enough to spend money on it. Can you find the account? She asked. I'm trying, Ethan replied. It's masked but not perfectly. Give me a little more time. Margaret nodded. Take it. There was a pause on the line. Then Ethan spoke again, his tone slightly different now. More serious. Margaret, whoever did this isn't just defamation. This is deliberate manipulation. If you want to pursue it legally, this could go very far. Margaret's eyes opened. Her reflection faintly visible in the dark screen of the television. I know, she said. And she did. But this wasn't about lawyers. Not yet. Because something told her. This wasn't finished. Ethan, she said quietly. Yes. If you find who did this. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Don't confront them. Don't alert them. Another pause. Then. Understood. Margaret ended the call and set her phone down. The house was silent again. But now it felt different. Not empty. Not suffocating. Strategic. She glanced at the clock. 9:28 a.m. 32 minutes until the meeting. Margaret stood slowly, smoothing her sleeves, her movements calm and precise. They thought she would walk into that room confused, defensive, desperate to explain. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. They're moving too fast, she murmured. And that was their first real mistake. Margaret arrived exactly on time. Not early. Not late. 10 a.m. Precision mattered. The bank's conference room was quiet, insulated from the noise of the outside world. Polished wood table. Neutral walls. Soft lighting that made everything feel controlled, almost clinical. Daniel was already there. He stood when she entered, his expression tight, uncertain. Mom, he said, stepping forward. Thanks for coming. Margaret nodded once, calm. Of course. Sophie sat across the table, already composed, a folder neatly arranged in front of her. She smiled when Margaret walked in, warm, sympathetic, perfectly measured. Margaret, she said softly, I'm really glad you came. Not Mom. Still. Margaret took her seat without responding to the smile. She placed her handbag beside her chair, folded her hands lightly on the table, and waited. Let them speak first. They always reveal more that way. A man in a suit, Mr. Reynolds, the financial advisor, cleared his throat gently. Thank you all for being here, he began. I understand this is a sensitive time. Our goal today is simply to discuss next steps regarding asset management, given recent events. Recent events. Margaret's gaze remained steady. Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. Mom, he said, his tone softer now. We're just concerned. The video, it's everywhere. People are talking. And we think it might be best if we helped manage things for a while. Helped manage. Margaret didn't react. Sophie leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle. Just temporarily, she added. Until everything settles. It's really about protecting you. Protecting. Margaret's fingers remained still, but her mind moved quickly. Same words. Same pattern. Control disguised as care. She turned her head slightly toward Sophie. And what exactly would that involve? Margaret asked calmly. Sophie opened the folder in front of her. Inside were documents. Neatly prepared. Tabs marked. Sections highlighted. Prepared in advance. Of course. It's quite simple, Sophie said. A limited power of attorney. Just for financial matters. It would allow Daniel to step in and handle decisions on your behalf. Investments, property, accounts, nothing permanent. Margaret's eyes moved briefly to Daniel. He avoided her gaze. Not entirely. Just enough. Enough to show discomfort, but not enough to stop this. Margaret looked back at the documents, then at Sophie. And this was arranged when? She asked. Sophie's smile didn't falter. We started discussing it yesterday, she said smoothly. After everything happened, we felt it was important to act quickly. Yesterday. Margaret nodded slowly. So fast. Too fast. Mr. Reynolds spoke again, his tone careful. Of course, Mrs. Hale, this is entirely your decision. No one is forcing anything. But given the circumstances, it may provide some stability. Stability. Margaret let the word settle. Then she reached forward. Not to sign. Just to touch the edge of the document. Her fingers rested there for a moment. Then she looked up. At Daniel. Do you believe I need this? She asked. The question hung in the air. Daniel hesitated. Just for a second. But Margaret saw it. That flicker of doubt. Of uncertainty. Then. I just think it's safer. He said quietly. Safer. Margaret nodded once. As if accepting that answer. As if considering it seriously. Then she leaned back slightly in her chair. Calm. Measured. And this video, she said. You both believe it's real? Sophie answered first. It certainly looks real, she said gently. And perception matters, Margaret. Even if there's confusion, the damage is already done. Confusion. Such a careful word. Margaret held her gaze. Unblinking. And if it isn't real? She asked. A pause. Small. But noticeable. Sophie tilted her head slightly. If that's the case, she said, her tone still soft, then this arrangement would only help protect you while we sort things out. Margaret smiled faintly. For the first time. Not warm. Not cold. Just knowing. Because Sophie had just revealed something important. She didn't care whether the video was real. Only that it was useful. Margaret withdrew her hand from the document. Folded it neatly back in her lap. And for a brief moment, she said nothing. Letting the silence stretch. Letting them wonder. Because somewhere, in another part of the city, Ethan was still working. Still tracing. Still getting closer. And Margaret knew something they didn't. This conversation was already outdated. They just didn't know it yet. Margaret let the silence linger just a moment longer before she spoke again. Not rushed. Not defensive. Controlled. I'll need time to review this, she said calmly, sliding the folder back toward Sophie without opening it fully. I don't make decisions like this in a single meeting. Sophie's smile held, but only just. Of course, she replied smoothly. We expected you might feel that way. Expected. Margaret noticed everything now. Every word. Every inflection. Daniel exhaled quietly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. That's fine, Mom, he said. We're not trying to pressure you. We just want to move forward carefully. Margaret nodded once. Carefully. Another word that sounded harmless. Until you looked at how quickly they were moving. She stood. The meeting for her was already over. I appreciate the concern, she said, her tone polite, measured. I'll be in touch. Sophie stood as well. Let us know if you need help understanding anything, she added. These things can get complicated. Margaret met her eyes. For a fraction of a second. Then smiled. I'm sure I'll manage. By the time she stepped outside, the air felt different. Cooler. Sharper. Like stepping out of a staged performance and back into something real. Her phone buzzed. Margaret didn't check it immediately. She walked down the steps, past the glass doors, and only then reached into her bag. One message. From Ethan. She opened it. I found something. Margaret stopped walking. Her surroundings faded slightly, not disappearing, just becoming irrelevant. She tapped the message. Another line appeared. You're not going to like this. Margaret's expression didn't change. She typed back. Asterisk, call me. Asterisk. The phone rang within seconds. Tell me, she said the moment she answered. Ethan didn't hesitate. I traced the commission, he said. The video was ordered through a private freelance platform. High-end work. Custom deepfake generation. Margaret turned slightly, stepping away from the sidewalk traffic, her voice low. And the account? A pause. Short, but heavy. I got through part of the masking, Ethan continued. The payment didn't come directly from a personal account. Margaret's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. Then where? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, a business account, he said. Margaret's breath slowed. Focused. Whose business account? Ethan exhaled. Margaret. It's linked to Hale Consulting Group. The name landed quietly, but its impact was immediate. Margaret didn't speak. She didn't need to, because she knew that name. It was Daniel's company. The one he had built over the last decade. The one he was proud of. The one he had full control over. You're sure? She asked finally. Yes, Ethan said. The payment trail leads there. It's been routed through a secondary layer, but the origin is clear. Margaret looked out across the street. Cars passing. People moving. Normal life continuing as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Because this was different. This wasn't just Sophie anymore. This reached further. Deeper. Was it authorized directly? Margaret asked. I don't know yet, Ethan replied. I can see the account, but not who initiated the transaction. It could have been anyone with access. Anyone. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Calm. Sharp. Because now the situation had shifted. Before it was suspicion. Now, it was evidence. But incomplete. And incomplete truths were dangerous. Keep digging, she said quietly. I need to know exactly who did it. I will, Ethan replied. Margaret. If this is what it looks like. It's not, she cut in. Not harsh. Just certain. A pause. Then she added. Not yet. She ended the call and stood there for a moment, her thoughts aligning, locking into place. Daniel's company. Sophie's timing. The urgency. The meeting. The documents. All of it. Connected. But not fully explained. And that meant one thing. There was still another layer. Another truth underneath this one. Margaret's gaze hardened slightly. They think I'm catching up, she murmured under her breath. A faint, almost imperceptible smile followed. But I'm already ahead. Because now, this wasn't just about proving the video was fake. It was about proving who wanted it to be real. And why. Margaret didn't go home right away. Instead she drove. Not aimlessly, but slowly, deliberately, giving her thoughts space to settle into something clearer than instinct. Daniel's company. The payment. The timing. None of it felt random. But it also didn't feel complete. Because if Daniel had truly ordered that video, he wouldn't have hesitated in that meeting. He wouldn't have looked at her the way he did. That brief flicker. That doubt. Margaret had seen it. And she trusted what she saw more than what she was told. Her phone rested on the passenger seat. Silent. For now. But her mind was anything but. She pulled into a quiet parking area near a small park and turned off the engine. For a moment she just sat there. Hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Then she reached for her phone. Scrolled. And selected Daniel's number. The line rang once. Twice. Then. Mom. His voice sounded different. Not defensive this time. Tired. Margaret kept her tone even. Daniel, she said. I need to ask you something. And I want you to answer me honestly. A pause. Then. Okay. Margaret looked straight ahead, her voice steady. Did you have anything to do with that video? Silence. Not the kind filled with anger. Not the kind filled with denial. This silence was thinking, processing, and that told her everything. Mom, no, Daniel said finally. Of course not. Why would you even ask that? Margaret didn't react to the words. She reacted to the hesitation that came before them. Because the payment for that video came from your company account, she said. Another silence. Sharper this time. What? Daniel said. This time there was no hesitation. Just confusion. Real confusion. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. There it was. That account, she continued calmly. Who has access to it? Daniel exhaled. You're saying someone used my company to pay for this? He asked, his voice tightening. Yes. A longer pause followed. Margaret could hear him moving on the other end, walking, maybe pacing. Okay, he said slowly. All right, let me think. She waited. Didn't interrupt. Didn't push. Because the truth, when given space, often revealed itself. There are only a few people with access, Daniel said. Me, my financial manager. He trailed off. Margaret didn't speak. She didn't need to. And Sophie, he finished quietly. The name settled between them. Heavy. Unavoidable. Margaret's grip on the phone remained steady. And does Sophie handle transactions? She asked. Sometimes, Daniel admitted. Not major ones. But she has access. For convenience. Convenience. Margaret's gaze lowered slightly. Of course. Another pause. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter now. Mom, are you sure about this? About the payment? Yes. No hesitation. No doubt. Another silence. Longer. Denser. And then, that doesn't make sense, Daniel said, almost to himself. Why would she? He stopped. Mid-sentence. Margaret heard it. That moment when a thought forms, but isn't ready to be spoken. Daniel, she said gently. What were you going to say? Nothing. Then. Nothing, he replied. Too quickly. Margaret didn't push. But she noted it. Carefully. Because that wasn't confusion. That was recognition. You should check your account activity, she said. Every transaction. Every authorization. I will, Daniel said immediately. I'm going to call my accountant right now. Margaret nodded, though he couldn't see her. Good. She paused. Then added. And Daniel, don't tell Sophie yet. A sharp inhale on the other end. Why not? Margaret's voice lowered slightly. Because if she did this, she said, you don't want her knowing you found out. Silence. Then. Okay, he said. Not certain. But listening. Margaret ended the call and set the phone down in her lap. Her reflection stared back faintly from the dark screen. Calm. Focused. Because now the picture was changing. Daniel wasn't leading this. He was inside it. But not in control. And that meant something far more dangerous. Someone else was. Margaret's gaze lifted toward the park ahead. Children playing. People walking. Normal life continuing unaware. She exhaled slowly. Sophie, she murmured under her breath. But even as she said the name, something didn't sit right. Because if Sophie had done this, if she had gone this far, then she wasn't just reckless. She was confident. Too confident. And people like that usually believe they couldn't be caught. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly, which meant they often made one mistake. They went too far. And when they did, everything unraveled. The only question now was how far Sophie had already gone, and what she had planned next. Margaret returned home just after noon. The house was quiet exactly as she had left it, but it no longer felt the same. Before it had been a place of comfort. Now it felt like a place where something had been quietly watched, studied, perhaps even planned around. She set her bag down by the door and didn't take off her coat right away. Instead, she walked slowly through the living room, her eyes moving across familiar objects, the framed photos, the bookshelf, the small details of a life built over decades. Everything looked normal. But Margaret had lived long enough to know that appearances meant very little. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. She answered immediately. I checked the account, he said, his voice tight. There was a payment. 2 days ago. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. 2 days. Before the video went public. So it was planned, she said quietly. Yes, Daniel replied. And it wasn't a small amount either. Whoever did this paid for high-end work. A pause. Then, it was authorized through Sophie's login. The words landed without shock. Margaret had expected them, but expectation didn't make them lighter. I didn't approve it, Daniel added quickly. I didn't even know it happened. I believe you, Margaret said. And she did. Because now the pieces fit. Too cleanly. Too precisely. But Daniel, she continued, her tone sharpening just slightly, you said something earlier. A pause. What do you mean? You started to ask why she would do this, Margaret said. And then you stopped. Silence. Margaret waited. Because this mattered. On the other end of the line, Daniel exhaled slowly. It's just, he began, then hesitated again. Daniel. Her voice was calm, but firm. And this time he didn't avoid it. She's been asking about your finances, he admitted. For months. Margaret didn't speak. She kept bringing it up, he continued. Your accounts, the house, what would happen if something ever changed? Changed. Margaret's expression hardened slightly. And what did you tell her? She asked. That it wasn't her concern, Daniel said quickly. That everything was already structured. That Dad handled it years ago. Margaret glanced toward the bookshelf again. Toward the framed photo of her husband. Yes, he had. And very carefully. But she didn't drop it, Daniel added quietly. Of course she didn't. Margaret walked slowly toward the window, her reflection faint in the glass. And recently? She asked. Daniel hesitated. Then, she started saying things, he admitted, about how you seemed different. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Different how? Forgetful, Daniel said. Confused sometimes. She said she was worried. Margaret let out a soft breath. There it was. The narrative. The foundation. Not just humiliation. Not just reputation damage. But something deeper. She wanted to establish that I wasn't capable, Margaret said quietly. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because now, it was obvious. The video. The urgency. The meeting. The documents. It wasn't random. It was a sequence. Carefully arranged. She needed proof, Margaret continued. Or at least something that looked like proof. And the video, Daniel began, creates instability, Margaret finished. Publicly. Visibly. A long silence followed. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice lower now. Mom, if she did this. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Margaret turned slightly, her gaze steady. She did, she said. Not angry. Not emotional. Certain. Another pause. Then, what do we do? Daniel asked. Margaret didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't a question that required speed. It required precision. She thinks she's ahead, Margaret said slowly. She thinks I'm reacting. A faint pause. Then her voice lowered. But I'm not. Daniel didn't interrupt. He listened, because something in her tone had changed. She used your account, Margaret continued. She spread the video. She pushed for legal control. Each step. Clear. Defined. But she made one mistake. What? Daniel asked. Margaret's reflection in the window looked back at her. Calm. Unshaken. She assumed I wouldn't see the pattern, she said. A small pause. Then. And she assumed I wouldn't prepare. Daniel's breath caught slightly. Prepare for what? Margaret turned away from the window. Her voice steady. For the moment she goes too far. A beat. Quiet. Heavy. Then she added. And Daniel. That moment is very close. Because now everything Sophie had done was no longer hidden. It was forming a line. And once a line becomes clear, it becomes traceable. And once it's traceable, it becomes undeniable. Margaret picked up her phone again. Her next move already forming. Because this was no longer about suspicion. It was about timing. And she intended to choose the exact moment. To end it. Margaret didn't confront Sophie immediately. That would have been the obvious move. The emotional move. The mistake. Instead she waited. Because timing, her husband had always said, wasn't about acting quickly. It was about acting when it mattered most. That evening she sat in her living room with the lights dimmed, her phone resting on the table in front of her. The house was quiet again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was prepared. Her phone buzzed. "Ethan." She answered. "I have everything," he said. Margaret didn't move. "Explain." "The freelancer who made the video," Ethan continued, "kept records. Not publicly but privately. Payment confirmations, client messages, project instructions." Margaret's gaze sharpened. "And he recorded the entire commission process," Ethan said. "Screen captures, voice notes, even a short video call." A pause. Then more quietly, "It's her." Margaret closed her eyes for just a moment. Not in shock. In confirmation. She gave detailed instructions. Ethan went on. What you should say. How you should act. Even the tone. Angry, entitled, dismissive. Every word deliberate. Every detail crafted. She wanted it to look believable, Ethan added. Not exaggerated. Just enough to destroy your reputation. Margaret opened her eyes again. Cold. Focused. "Do you have the files?" she asked. "Yes." "Secure them," she said. "Multiple copies." "I already did." Of course he had. Margaret allowed herself a small nod. "Good." There was a brief silence on the line. Then Ethan spoke again. "There's one more thing." Margaret waited. "She didn't just request the video," he said. "She explained why she needed it." Margaret's fingers stilled. "Tell me." Ethan hesitated just slightly. "As proof," he said. "She said she needed something to show that you were unstable, difficult, unfit to manage your own affairs." The words settled heavily. But Margaret didn't flinch. Because she had already seen it. The pattern. The plan. This was just the confirmation. "She also mentioned the legal angle," Ethan continued. "Said that once your reputation was damaged publicly, it would be easier to justify stepping in for your protection." Margaret exhaled slowly. Everything aligned. Perfectly. Too perfectly. "Send me everything," she said. "I will." "And Ethan." "Yes. Do not contact her. Do not let anyone know you were involved." "I won't." Margaret ended the call and sat there in the quiet. For a long moment she didn't move. Because this was the turning point. Not suspicion. Not theory. Proof. Clear. Undeniable. She reached for her phone again. Scrolled. And selected a name. Sophie. Her thumb hovered over the screen for just a second. Then she typed. * dinner tomorrow. Just us. Think we should talk. *. She read the message once. Then sent it. The response came faster than expected. *, of course. I'd love that. *. Margaret stared at the words. That same polished tone. That same careful warmth. Unchanged. As if nothing had happened. As if everything was still under control. Margaret set the phone down gently. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Because now, Sophie believed she was winning. She believed the video had worked. She believed Margaret was cornered, pressured, ready to concede. And that belief was exactly what Margaret needed. She stood slowly and walked toward the window. The night outside was still. Dark. Quiet. But not empty. Not anymore. "Tomorrow," she said softly. Not to anyone. Not even to herself. Just stating it. Because tomorrow, the performance would end. The truth would surface. And Sophie, for the first time, would realize she had never been in control at all. Sophie arrived exactly on time. Elegant, composed, wearing the same kind of effortless confidence she always carried. As if the world naturally arranged itself around her. "Margaret," she said warmly, stepping inside. "You look well." Margaret smiled. "I've had time to think." They sat across from each other at the dining table. No candles. No decorations. Just 2 glasses of water and a quiet room that felt deliberate. Sophie folded her hands lightly. "I'm glad," she said. "I think it's important we move forward calmly. There's been a lot of confusion." Confusion. Margaret let the word settle. Then she reached for her phone. "Before we do that," she said, "there's something I'd like you to see." Sophie's smile didn't change. "Of course." Margaret tapped the screen, turned the phone, and pressed play. At first, Sophie didn't react. Why would she? She had seen the fake video already. But this wasn't that video. This was different. A screen recording. A conversation. A voice. Her voice. Clear. Undeniable. Make her look unstable. Not crazy. Just difficult enough that people start to question her. Sophie's smile faltered. Just slightly. Margaret said nothing. She let it continue. I need something I can use legally. Something that shows she shouldn't be managing things on her own. Sophie's fingers tightened. Barely. But Margaret saw it. The video shifted. Now a video call. Sophie's face clear, unmistakable. Discussing details. Adjusting tone. Refining the narrative. Every piece of the plan laid out. In her own words. Margaret paused the video. Silence filled the room. Not tense. Not chaotic. Final. Sophie didn't speak at first. Then, this isn't what it looks like, she said. The words came automatically. Reflex. Margaret tilted her head slightly. No? She asked. Sophie straightened. Recovering. Fast. It's taken out of context, she said. You don't understand the full situation. Margaret's expression didn't change. I understand enough. A pause. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a thin folder, and placed it on the table. Your payment, she said calmly. From Daniel's company account. Another paper. The transaction logs. Another. The freelancer's full record. Sophie's breathing shifted. Subtle, but no longer steady. And copies have already been secured, Margaret added. Multiple locations. A longer silence this time. Because now, there was no space left to maneuver. No angle left to adjust. Sophie's eyes hardened slightly. The mask slipping. You don't have proof of intent, she said. Margaret held her gaze. I have your voice, she replied. A beat. And your explanation. That was enough. They both knew it. Sophie leaned back slowly. For the first time. No smile. No softness. Just calculation. You think this changes anything? She asked quietly. Margaret didn't answer immediately. She studied her. Carefully. Because now, she was finally seeing Sophie clearly. Not the polished version. Not the careful one. The real one. Yes, Margaret said at last. A small pause. Then, it changes everything. She stood, calm, unshaken, and picked up her phone. I've already spoken to a lawyer, she continued. Defamation. Fraud. Unauthorized financial activity. Each word landed with precision. And Daniel knows. That one. Hit. Sophie's eyes flickered. Just once. But it was enough. Margaret moved toward the door. Then stopped. Turned slightly. And looked back. The video wasn't real, she said quietly. A pause. Long enough to matter. But it showed me something that was. Sophie said nothing. Because there was nothing left to say. Margaret opened the door. Stepped outside. And for the first time since it all began, the air felt clean. Not because everything was over, but because the truth was no longer hidden. Behind her, the house remained silent. Still. Heavy with what had just been uncovered. And ahead, for the first time, Margaret wasn't reacting anymore. She was simply moving forward.